Today was the day of dialogue conference between the European Union and South Africa. The topic was career guidance and career guidance service development. The focus of the meeting was about the usability of different type of psychological and non-psychological tools, and the colleagues in South Africa has been working on a new guideline, structure of the guideline, which would have three pillars: the self-exploratory tools, which supporting the self-learning in career development, the career preparedness tools, which are more educational tools, and the career information tools, which probably more widely preferred or as labor market intelligence or tool for labor market intelligence. I had a short presentation and an input about the development of career guidance, or as we call it in the European Union since 2004, lifelong guidance related professional list of competencies, code of ethics, and then the way how we are using different type of career survey, questionnaires, quiz, and also test in Hungary. This topic was several times also discussed under the Hungarian Pedagogical Society Division for Career Education. Those videos are available in the YouTube channel of the Hungarian Pedagogical Society. So here I just want to quickly repeat the key findings of my input of the conference. So it's like a post-recorded compressed presentation from my side. As you can see, the title is not only about the development of these tools. Since we are the member of the European Union, there is usually most of the emphasis is on the development and not so much about maintenance work. Obviously, the reason is how the additional EU funds can be mobilized in different EU countries, but maintenance of these services and the finding the responsible authorities, finding the responsible professionals for the maintenance, I think it's also an important issue. So let's see what was quickly discussed. Moving to the presentation, that was the opening discussion, and then let's see what I prepared for the conference. So as a starting point, I use this Headup of inventory. Since CareerNet exists in the last couple of years, based on the European Lifelong Guidance Policy Network guidelines since 2015, we have a very structured description of the EU member states and then some of the neighboring countries as well, like Turkey. So I just quoted some of the elements of this country fish, which was prepared by me a few years ago, and then will be updated later in this year. So I think when we are trying to understand what different countries are doing on career guidance, and then under the new umbrella concept of lifelong guidance, especially how they are using the different type of questionnaires, quiz, and testing career guidance and development, it's also important to see the departure point and the history of these countries. So during the conference, I was referring to the 1970s, namely the work, the pioneer work of János Csirska, but I could mention several other fellows from the 20th centuries who's contributed to the development of the Hungarian guidance system, and then the knowledge and the perspective we are having. And we prepared an article about the Hungarian, the Czech, and the Slovak system, and the development of this system from the König und Kaiser years to the current years, and this is available in an international journal. So here I'm just referring to this work. What is an important element of the historical lesson is the following, that we wouldn't be here where we are as a Hungarian guidance community if all of these developments in the 20th century wouldn't or didn't highlighted the role of pedagogical added value in the guidance process. So in that sense, many of the Hungarian research fellows and then professionals in the field, like mentioning another, like the work of Mérei Ferenc, were forerunners in that way, that most of the focus of as it was used to be called vocational guidance was about testing and matching people with certain jobs. Obviously, this was the requirements of the early industrialism, but already in the 1940s and after the Second World War in the 1960s was very clearly elaborated by these fellows and others. I'm going to name a few more Hungarians, that this is not really about testing or primary career education and career development, even in adulthood, is not about testing and not about fixing people or matching people with certain jobs, but or certain career routes or occupations, but this is much more, and this is about the individualized learning process, so the self-exploration and learning about ourselves and learning about the work environment and the society around us. It also provides us a philosophical understanding how the Hungarian guidance community has been developed so far, although this is very much fragmented still. It means that this community mainly believes on the developmental process based on the developmental theories, like mentioning the name of Donald Super, everybody well known, his works, which is not really about the further adaptation and over usage of psychological testing. So I'm not against pedagogical or psychological testing, just want to really clearly describe the role and the rationale of having career guidance services. So back in the communist years, in the 1980s, Hungary, as many other communist countries, had we had pedagogical guidance centers basically for youth guidance. There was no official unemployment, and unofficially was basically no real unemployment until the early 1980s. But Hungary was not a unique case. As we know, recently Armenia has the same system, or back in the 20th century was the case in Czechoslovakia. This is also a well-documented story, or in independent Croatia, later on in Yugoslavia, we also were observing the same structures. And the second added value of these structures from the 70s and 80s was, or still is, that this was the first time that different professionals learned to work together. So economists, pedagogists, psychologists, so not exclusively psychologists and not exclusively vocational psychologists were engaged in this joint work. Why is it important? Because it was all very useful and important in the 1990s after the change of the regime, and not only the political but also the labor market structures towards an open market economy, from something which was basically planned by different line ministries. And back in the socialist years, the different areas of the economies, different sectors had its own ministries, which seems very awkward watching it from the present perspective. So two eminent fellows, two ladies whose has been playing or played very important role in the development of the concept of career guidance or lifelong career guidance in Hungary. I'm quoting both of them. One is Professor Szilágyi, the other one is Professor Ritók. Professor Szilágyi's point is that whenever we are talking about career guidance, career counseling, career coaching, mentoring, and all of these forms we are using currently, then we are talking about the support of healthy individuals and then the capacity building of these individuals so then they are capable to solve their own problems, even if it's not a problem usually as we call it in English, but barriers, so goes beyond your own barriers and then leaving your comfort zone. Also important that these people are healthy individuals, so we are not talking about any type of diagnostical tools here. That's another part of psychology. We are not touching it. And then from the guidance process, it's always important that it's based on psychological knowledge. So the psychology is behind, the psychological concepts are behind. I think we cannot make distinction between non-psychological and psychological tools because whatever we are using as applicable tools in the field of career guidance and counseling, or by the way, in other field of counseling and guidance and family and addiction counseling as well, all based on psychological knowledge or pedagogical knowledge, and that's much be appreciated and much be understood by the professionals. Okay, and the other quotation is coming from Professor Ritok, where I would highlight the element which is now everywhere in modern theories, policies, and system design, which is about the decision-making process. So empowering the end user, providing capability for the end users to overcome his or her barriers and making decisions. Once you are making a decision, it also means that you are responsible for this decision making. This is also a very, this used to be a very unique understanding or way of understanding in countries which were under the communist regimes, because obviously individuals and families shouldn't be responsible for their own life and life design in the communist countries. But there was a strong resistance in Hungary already after the 56 revolution, and that went through all the Kader regime in the 70s, 80s against the communist structures. And these people, I'm talking about these two professors here, were active members of the career guidance community. Both are psychologists by accident. And they worked in different career guidance centers as well, alongside with their teaching activities. So I think these two pillars, having professionals who have a wider understanding on the concept of career guidance, and even if somebody is coming from the field of or professional field of psychology, when understanding about a wider concept of career design was an important element, or is still an important element of the development of the Hungarian guidance system, and having an institutional capacity, although in the 1980s this institutional capacity was melted, but still the institutional memory somehow is present in the current Hungarian situation. One more important pillar which we need to highlight here is the professionalization of career counseling, and then it's already happened in very early 90s, which was a time when in most of the countries career counseling, or how we call it right now, human resource counseling, was not domained as a profession or even not as an occupation. Was mainly a job post or an additional activity of educational counselors or placement officers or other type of professionals like social workers. So Hungary was rather unique in the 90s, thanks to the different World Bank project developments and all of these institutional capacities and professional personal capacities I was talking about a few minutes ago, that the country end up with a fully professionalized way of understanding career guidance. So one pillar of a quality assurance and the customer protection in any field requires the professionalization of certain activities. And then if we look at back on the history and the history of wage work or the labor market itself, it's always like that. Then as societies has been advancing and developing, new and newer professions, new and newer occupations has been arising. And then I'm using simultaneously occupation and profession, but obviously profession is in a higher grade. So here we are talking about a professional activity, not only an occupation. By the way, as a footnote, it's important to mention that in the 93 version of the ISCO, the national version of the ISCO, employment counselor as a standalone occupation was already registered. And I think, again, this is something as a unique selling point of the Hungarian guidance community and system. Well, the second pillar of any quality assurance is the code of ethics, or any type of certainty the end users could have if the system is malfunctioning, or the professionals are misleading them, or they are even cheating. Like in every system it could happen. Then what are the quality elements, quality assurance elements which can protect the end users? When I'm talking about end users in career counseling, I'm talking about obviously the individuals, but don't be over individualized in this approach. We're also talking about the households in economical sense, the families in social sense, and obviously about local communities and how they see, and the whole society, how they see, how they understand the role of career and the individual lifespan. So is it something unchangeable? Once you are in a track, then you have to follow the career track you were put when you were a teenager, or do you have chances to change your career several times, or are you forced by the labor market or globalization or because of political issues to change your career? Having said this, it's still important to mention that in Hungary a couple of code of ethics were drafted. I think there was already one in the late 1990s, but none of these were accepted. And when I'm talking about the lack of acceptance, I'm talking about this lack of agreement at the professionals level, but also at the government's level. And then it's already a challenging issue that should these type of ethical guidelines accepted by the governments, my professional feeling is probably they shouldn't, or by the professionals who are active in the fields. And then obviously once you have a professional association for certain activities, then within a couple of weeks you will have another one, and then the two or three associations could compete with each other and not necessarily supporting each other. So anyhow, the present situation is that in the Hungarian context, we have at least 2-3 drafted guidelines and code of ethics for guidance professionals, but none of them are approved or agreed either by the government institution, ministries, or nor by the professional associations. It does not necessarily mean, obviously, that there are no code of ethics in different fields, like the psychologist has one, pedagogists, social workers. And then it's important to note here that there are several professionals in the field of career counseling who are originated from these fields. So even though there is no unified ethical guidelines for career guidance professionals, it doesn't mean that if you are a psychologist, if you are a pedagogist, or social workers, then your original code of ethics are not applicable for your daily professional activities. It's also important to note that in the last couple of decades, we are using a general model of career counseling or career guidance. Those who were the students like myself of Professor Szilágyi, we are calling it the 5-step counseling model, which, if you are familiar with different models of counseling, then could be 3-step or even could be more. So there are several parallel structures in the international literature. Why these 5 steps are important for the Hungarian guidance community? Because it's provide a very clear basic understanding what should be the structure of the counseling process. Either it's an in-person or online guidance, or it's an individual guidance activity, or group or community guidance. It always starts with the exploration phase, and then it's the role of the professional to offer a program definition, which then need to be agreed by the client, with the client. So not the professional is the one who is making the definition. The role of the professional to providing different program definitions and making a common agreement with the client, and working on clarification, analysis, synthesis, and the agreement, which is the final part. It means that the counselee, the user, have to understood what are the next steps he or she is going to take, and what are the different elements of the action plan he or she was drafting as the end result of the counseling process. This is a very light touch in a way that in psychology or even in pedagogical approaches, there are much heavier schools as well. There are more detailed schools as well, how they are actually describing the general counseling process. My personal professional understanding is that this is not too heavy, neither too light, so it's usually properly usable in career counselors training for those who are mainly not coming from the field of psychology, or they're not coming from the field of social work. So those people who's having the first understanding of the counseling general model here. And then what was also discussed, the role of the different type of questionnaires, as I mentioned already in the opening slides. The main rationale of the meeting was to going through, to talk through the different type of career test questionnaires, career quiz. I'm not listing all of these words, and I was just making a point that even in the English literature, sometimes it's misleading that we are talking about career test. Well, again, not only in the career counseling field, but in any field of counseling, which I think is not really adequate from the psychologist. That sometimes we are calling something a test, which is basically not a test. Or sometimes we are calling something an assessment, which is not an assessment. So in the Hungarian context, in the last couple of decades, and the last 20 years since I'm personally involved in this, we are trying to make as much clarity as possible, and making it clear that usually in career guidance or lifelong guidance, we are using questionnaires or career quiz or whatever other names you want to use, but the questionnaire is probably the most appropriate, which means that behind most of the questionnaires we are using, or behind many of these questionnaires we are using in the daily practice, there are different type of assessment tools, or different type of test batteries as well. I mentioned one of the development from the 1980s of the Department of Labor, the General Aptitude Test Battery, which in the 90s was also translated to Hungarian, so we are still very heavily using this, but that was transformed, and this is assessed by the American Psychological Association and so on. Now, we are not going to the details of the reliability issues of the test developments here, because that's not the main purpose of the presentation, but obviously career guidance tools, questionnaires, even questionnaires have to go through of these type of developmental stages as well, and proving that they are capable to measuring certain issues. Okay, so taking the GATB as an example, this was translated to Hungary and tested in Hungary, but then we also prepared a a questionnaire version, and this questionnaire version being used, and there are also the same issues, for example, with many of the interest tests, which were originated as test batteries, but then were translated to lighter tools, which can be either used by the guidance professionals, or nowadays, since we have the internet, which is much more common, we are developing tools which can be used by the users themselves. Again, here I want to make a note that although there are a lot of emphasis on the development of written questionnaires, this is partly the past on one hand, because we are much more, probably the right word is irritated by the internet and smartphones. So once we are now having TikTok and Facebook and all of these tools around us, then the visual irritation is so strong that there are more and more test makers or questionnaire developers who's trying to move to the direction where we are not really using very long sentences. And the second point is, which is absolutely unluckily the case in Hungary as well, that based on the PISA figures, we have like almost 1/3 of the young population who's basically not able to understand these questionnaires. I mean, not able to read and understand what they are reading properly. So illiteracy or these type of issues are around us, and this is not only Hungary. So whatever we are doing with the development of the written format of tests and questionnaires, we always have to be very careful and understand that 1/3 or even more of our customer groups cannot be really reached out with this type of tools. So then we have to rely on other techniques like visualization and basically targeted talk, which is the main tool of any guidance professional. Yeah, this is what I was just saying, that although we are strongly relying on different type of questionnaires, different type of career tools, and everybody's very busy to develop newer version of these online tools and assessments in the field of career, because this is obviously a very popular topic. We are still believe that the real and the main tool of any guidance professional is the conversation, a targeted conversation by Rogers, and then properly learning how to use the communication micro skills. It doesn't mean that we are not using different type of information tools. Nowadays, in the last 15 years, since we have wide access to the World Wide Web, and we have the 3G and now 4 and 5G's access, we are talking about maxi systems, and the maxi systems in lifelong guidance means that we are trying to combine the self-exploration element, the occupational exploration element, and the division of labor, the labor market element. So the three elements of these triangles, which makes a career guidance or lifelong guidance professionals. So these are also the professional knowledge of this type of people. Here, what you can see was the development of different type of databases from the late 90s, almost before the internet. Some of them were first issued in CD-ROMs, and before that, like in many other countries, we had the paper-based information provision. So information was basically put into books, and they were printed in the 70s, 80s, even the early 90s. This is what we are not really doing anymore, or most of the clients wouldn't really use this. The most advanced system was the Lifelong Guidance Portal, which is unfortunately not available anymore. This was a portal which had three main channels. One was for students or youngsters, the other one were for adults, and the second entry point was for the career guidance professionals. In Hungarian abbreviation, this is what we call the TV key. So it was a virtual community for guidance professionals, and I think since I'm in the international field of career guidance, I never saw any other country or any other system which were so strategically use the 3 channels alongside. So this was really a lifelong guidance portal. But as I said, this is not maintained and not available anymore. And just to sum up some of the key points here. So whenever we are talking about the development of a lifelong guidance system, the development of different type of self-helping tools or educational tools which are supporting career learning and career development, as tool developers, as policymakers, as politicians, decision makers, as parents and teachers and so on, we all have to make decisions. So are we talking about the access pillar? Is it more important in a system to provide access to different type of guidance, guiding tools, or is it more important to have a proper assessment? So are we talking about career assessment, which I would say alongside with vocational psychology, and this is the old model we are not really anymore following. Again, I'm not arguing against vocational psychology, I'm just saying that career guidance should reach a much wider audience, especially in the transitional labor markets when people are forced to change jobs and change occupations during the lifespan, or at least learn something new in their own profession. So access or assessment, I would say this is the two element or two parts of the same continuum. Are we talking about a lot of assessment and very weak quality of tools, or are we assessment and very good quality of tools, or access and poor quality of the tools, and how we find a balance between the two? The second issue is that modern lifelong guidance services are about decision-making support, which means that the responsibility and the burden with these responsibilities goes to the client and not owned by the professional. I already mentioned about the importance of this MOXIE system and why and how to build them. Nowadays, with the use of the internet, as we are not using CD-ROMs or any other type of data storage currently, I think this is the only rationale or only way forward which has a good meaning, where we are combining the self-exploration, the occupational exploration, and the labor market. And here I just want to quote Boostin, and then saying that not everybody in modern societies, even not in the USA, has an occupation, even not a profession. Few of us has professions, which is a passion as well. It means we are doing activities even those are not paid. This shouldn't be misused in normal societies, but nevertheless, when we are talking about the issue of precariats, we are talking about the issue of those people who are just having jobs for living, but they don't understand their jobs as occupations, and then how to serving these people. That's also important. And the third element, which is probably a bit more theoretical and also linked with social policy, the labor market as a concept of the division of labor. So the moral density of a society, as Durkheim was saying. A few more points here. We all noted that lifelong guidance means that career guidance and career development, it's a lifelong process. It does not necessarily mean that the services should go as lifelong. It means that the individuals should learn something lifelong. Basically, lifelong guidance is a parallel process with lifelong learning. It also means that when we are developing lifelong guidance tools, we are also talking about the personal relationships between people. So the peer-to-peer support is also an important element of the process. And when we are developing tools, we have to be careful not only developing tools or questionnaires which can be used only by professionals, but it should be interpreted and not misused by peer-to-peer communication as well. And really the last point before we close this summary is about Krumbold's statements in the meeting of the American Psychologist Association, where he was challenged by other psychologists that when we are talking about career guidance, is it really useful, as it's not really touching the personality, and then how useful this how useful this short type of interventions could be. And his answer was that if you are saying that what I'm doing is a quick fix, then I'm very happily accepting it, that this is a quick fix, but this is useful in many people's life. And the last slide I have is basically a couple of references I used for this presentation. So thank you very much for your attention.